won't work. All it's going to do is exacerbate the underlying economic imbalances and make the ultimate resolution of those balances that much more painful. We are in the process of turning this Great Recession into another Great Depression, and maybe even worse than the Great Depression, because this time, instead of individuals benefiting from falling consumer prices like our grandparents did, we're going to have runaway consumer prices and maybe even hyperinflation. That's why I've been warning about an inflationary depression. You see, all the people who didn't see this collapse coming, they're convinced that it was because of a failure of the free market system, that there are inevitable inherent flaws in capitalism, and government needs to save us from that by overseeing industry with careful regulation. And they're trying to say that we had all these problems because we didn't have enough regulation. And if we just have more government regulation, then in the future we're not going to have these problems. Well, the fact of the matter is, and the reason that I was able to understand and make the forecast that I did was not because I'm so smart. It's just simply I understand how government regulations distort and interfere with free markets. It was the government. It was cheap money from the Fed. It was central banking. It was central government planning. It was Fannie and Freddie, government-sponsored enterprises that guaranteed loans and created the moral hazard that allowed banks to lend recklessly because they no longer had free market discipline. That was the problem. It was an excess of government. And the only solution is to re-embrace free market capitalism and to start repealing and abolishing all these rules and regulations and subsidies that have distorted the market. I mean, one of the most recent problems is this concept of too big to fail. Well, that's a government-created concept. That's not a free market concept. No company is too big to fail. Let it fail. It's the government that creates this with the implicit guarantee that they're going to bail out these big companies. And the minute the government allows creditors to believe that companies are too big to fail, well, then they'll keep lending money, even if it's obvious that the borrower can't pay it back, because they know the government will. And so the companies that are deemed too big to fail, well, they get even bigger. And so when they do fail, it costs us even more money to bail them out. And the other problem with this new ideology is that in blaming the free market for the problems of socialism, the solutions always involve more and bigger government. And that's where we're headed. We're trying to solve all these problems that government created with more government, which means we're only going to make the problems worse. I've been saying it's like there's this giant fire burning in the nation that the government set, and they try to put it out by pouring gasoline on it. And the more gasoline they pour on it, the bigger the fire gets. And so what do? They reach for more gasoline because that's all they know. And pretty soon the whole country's in this inferno and they don't know what's going on. You know, they look back to the 1930s and they say, well, we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the 1930s. But that's exactly what they're doing. The conventional wisdom is that we had a Great Depression because Hoover was too foolishly embracing the free market, and he just let everything be liquidated, and that's why we had a Great Depression, because Hoover was too much of a free market guy. That's complete revisionist history. It's the exact opposite. Hoover's Secretary of the Treasury gave him the advice to do nothing. That might be the last time that the Secretary of the Treasury ever gave anybody good advice, and Hoover ignored it. Hoover said, I'm not going to do that. And Hoover was the most interventionist president up until his time. He was a modern-day George Bush, or George Bush is a modern Herbert Hoover. And so it was Hoover's policies to interfere with the recession that created the Great Depression. And then Roosevelt came in and expanded all of his policies and turned that depression into the Great Depression, made it last through the Second World War. Barack Obama is the modern-day Roosevelt. The problem is, when Hoover first came into office, the government was tiny. The federal government was tiny. The whole budget was only $4 billion. That was the whole federal budget. Roosevelt doubled the size of government, but it was still tiny when he left office. So, he doubled like $8 billion. Now it's a monstrosity. The government can't afford a new Deal. We're too broke from the old New Deal, yet they're still acting like the country is solvent. They just passed this new health care bill. We're already bankrupted from the entitlements that exist. Right? Social Security right now is at the point where Bernie Madoff had to turn himself in. It's already spending more than it collects in taxes. It's insolvent on a cash flow basis. I mean, it's always been insolvent on an actual basis with a $10 trillion plus unfunded liability. but it's broke right now on a cash basis, and we don't understand that. The economy is in no shape to withstand that dramatic increase of government. So that's why I fear that this coming depression could be much worse. It's too bad that more of our economists don't understand the depression of 2020, because that one, of 1920, because that one never actually happened. Because we had a big drop in the stock market and in the GDP in 1920 following the end of the First World War, because during the First World War, the government, the Federal Reserve that was created in 1913, financed the First World War by printing money. And in fact, a little bit of trivia, originally the Federal Reserve wasn't even allowed to buy treasuries. They actually had to amend the Federal Reserve Act, give them the ability to buy treasuries to finance the First World War. So that inflation caused some malinvestments. When interest rates rose, when the war ended, we had this big contraction, but the politicians did nothing and it ended in a year. Unfortunately, that type of wisdom is lacking in Congress today, which is why I am running for the United States Senate. I'm hoping that somehow I can get into office and try to head this disaster off at the pass. I mean, the thinking in Washington is never to try to avert a crisis. Always wait for the crisis to happen and then figure out who to blame. We can't afford to do that at this point because the crisis is too big, and we need individuals who understand the dynamics and who are willing to put politics aside and actually do what's right. And since if I get elected to the Senate, since I don't care at all about getting reelected, I'll be the one person that will do that. Anyway, thank you. I know I'm probably already passed up my 10 minutes, but I will answer any questions about the race afterwards in the break room. Thanks.